So yeah, thank you for your time. As Billy mentioned, I co-chair Haringey Living Streets. I do that on a voluntary basis. And just to explain, for those who don't know, so Living Streets is a nationwide charity that looks at improving our street space. We're a charity that successfully campaigned for the UK's first pedestrian crossings and also speed limits in urban areas. And one of the things that we really focus on is a new vision, particularly in towns and cities where our streets are designed around people and not just motor traffic. We've seen a real increase in terms of car use in the UK. So in the last 50 years, the numbers of vehicles on the road has risen from 13 million to 38 million. And we think there's a real need to reduce those car journeys, particularly for short car journeys where we think they can be walked or cycled. And we think that reduction plays a key role in terms of reducing our carbon emissions. We also think it's about creating more livable streets. So those are places that are greener, less polluted, result in happier communities overall. But I also just wanted to flag that we see this as a social justice issue at its heart. So the first thing I wanted to flag in terms of that was just looking at car ownership. So this looks at percentage of households with no car or van. By kind of looking at England stats, London stats and Haringey wide, and just really wanted to flag that it's those in socially rented housing and privately rented housing that have the lowest levels of car ownership. And we know that it's often those who are from more deprived households who are likely to have least access to cars, but are most likely to feel the negative impacts of car use on our streets, whether that's from air pollution, whether it's from road violence, or whether it's access to street space. So just looking at road safety, so we kind of look at issues including air pollution, but also wider issues. And sorry, this slide is very busy. But the key message I wanted to get across was that 125 people were killed on London's roads last year and over 3,700 seriously injured. And the evidence suggests that children in deprived areas are twice as likely to be involved in road incidents. This chart on the right-hand side of my screen is a mapping that we did looking at pedestrian collisions in the borough from 2018 data. And what we saw is a much higher incident rate of collisions involving pedestrians in some of our most deprived wards in the east of the borough. I also then just wanted to flag that nearly 2/3 of adults in Haringey are overweight or obese, and children in the UK are now spending on average only 68 minutes a day outside. This slide shows obesity rates in the borough, and those in red are the highest rates of obesity. And again, you can see that a trend kind of much more strongly in the east of our borough, which we know is more deprived. And what we're saying when we create more livable streets is we want to create more spaces to enable people to get a daily dose of exercise, whether that's from walking or cycling or scooting. So then the question remains, how do we create streets that are more livable? How can we transform them? And I just wanted to come back to this point that a real focus area for us is how can we ensure that short car journeys, so 40% of urban journeys by car are under 2 miles. And we think a lot of those journeys could be perfectly suited for walking and cycling if we can create routes that are safe for people. So that the key question then is where do we put our effort? How do we persuade people to walk and cycle more? There's also a key question of where do you focus on, and I know that this has been a big topic that's been discussed in clean air groups on focusing on main roads or residential roads. And I just wanted to say from Haringey Living Streets perspectives, we think we need measures to increase walking and cycling, to reduce car usage and improve air quality on both residential and main roads. So main roads often experience some of our highest levels of air pollution, but residential roads are where the majority of people live. So we think it's really important to have measures on both areas at the same time. And I guess just to say as well that our vision in terms of coming to the solutions for some of these street space design is that we want to mobilise local groups in Haringey to look at what's their new vision for their streets. To take people on a journey of looking at what improvements need to be made. And those local groups we really suggest are made up of residents from side streets and also main streets, and looking at solutions for both. I'm going to go through in a moment on Haringey Living Streets 5 asks for improving kind of street space in Haringey, but just in terms of the wider picture, and particularly again on main road improvements. So as a group we really support, as Ian mentioned, the expansion of the ULEZ. We also support phasing out of diesel and petrol cars and moving that forward to the 2030 deadline. We'd like to see a reduction in car parking spaces and increasing in parking charges, car-free developments, and also protected cycle lanes and widened pavements, which I'll come to in a minute. But the idea is you're making walking and cycling more attractive, and at the same time making car driving more difficult, particularly for short journeys. Okay. And I'd say a large theme on our asks is about reclaiming road space. So the entire nature of our streets has changed as roads have become more dominated by cars. So we no longer see kids playing out on their streets in the same way that we did a couple of generations ago. So Haringey Living Streets first ask is about establishing school streets, and I'm not going to go into that in too much detail because I know Jane from Mums for Lungs is going to cover school streets. But our other kind of ask is on low traffic neighbourhood schemes. To put this in context, we saw data from the department, from TfL last week showing that there's been a near double increase in traffic on residential roads in London over the last 10 years. And largely a lot of that's been put down to the use of things like apps like Waze and increase in use of Uber. And low traffic neighbourhoods are a way to counter that. So you can use cheap bollards or planters to ensure that side roads aren't used as cut-throughs. The ambition of a low traffic neighbourhood design is to reduce traffic, not to replace it. And they can create citywide networks of direct routes for walking and cycling that any age or ability can use. And the idea is that we're really giving people alternatives to car journeys. There's also evidence to show that low traffic neighbourhoods can support more people to walk and cycle, can create overall air quality improvements in communities, and there's emerging evidence that they can also lead to a decrease in car ownership. We believe LTNs play an important part of the puzzle in rebalancing in favour of walking and cycling for short car journeys. Just in terms of the wider context, because I think LTNs are a bit of a hot topic at the moment because we're seeing quite a lot of them as part of the COVID-19 transport response. One of the reasons that they are being used quite so much by councils at the moment is they're a very fast intervention that can be made immediately to create networks for walking and cycling, and they can be adapted and they're of a temporary nature, so if they need to be adjusted, it's quite easy to. Low traffic neighbourhoods are not a new concept, so they're a kind of standard approach in the Netherlands, and actually most of London's post-war estates are built on the principles of low traffic neighbourhoods. And we also have examples in Hackney, there's a couple in Haringey, in St Anne's Wood actually, and also kind of probably most famously at the moment in Waltham Forest as part of the Mini Holland scheme. Just to say that we're conscious that the majority of people do live on side residential roads, and while we need safe walking and cycling routes on main roads, if people are faced with a hostile walking and cycling environment the moment they leave their homes, we're unlikely to see a shift in walking and cycling in the way that we need to. Also, as a group, we just wanted to say, so this is TfL's strategic network analysis on where you should focus low traffic neighbourhoods. And some of the things, as a group, we're really supportive of this as a way to really highlight where your first LTNs should go. And we think they should be borough-wide. But if you have to choose where they go in the immediate, looking at levels of 3 traffic in communities, recorded walking and cycling casualties, modelled potential cycling flows, but also things like levels of social deprivation and the numbers of schools in areas should also really be considered. Okay. I then wanted to move on to our second ask. So this was touched on earlier, but a real need for creating safe cycling routes across the borough. The idea is numerous studies have shown that the primary reason people don't cycle is because of fear. So the idea is you can't just encourage people to cycle more, you need to give them safe routes. And we support, there's a Dutch approach of 8 to 80. So the idea is, do we have cycle routes that we would feel comfortable for 8-year-olds to cycle on? And if you're 80 or 80 plus, would you feel confident on those routes? And also particularly, so these are some examples of what we would consider as protected or safe routes. We really want to see a vision in Haringey where secondary school children all have a protected cycle route to school. And that's really important because I think most people are happy potentially for a 6-year-old to be riding on the pavement if they don't feel obviously safe cycling the roads. But once you get to 15, people tend to feel that it's inconsiderate and you shouldn't really be on the pavement. So we want to make sure that secondary school children have safe protected cycle routes across the borough. The next point is just on a walking network to help us with that shift. So making sure that we have adequate pavement space, that we don't have cars parked on pavements, that we have adequate crossings to really make walking attractive, and pavement widening schemes on main roads. And then just our final two asks, so coming back to that point about road violence, so progress towards, we call it Vision Zero, so the idea of reducing traffic deaths year on year, enforcing 20 miles per hour across the borough, and also a net reduction in the number of car parking spaces in the borough. And the idea is you reduce that car parking space and reallocate it to other purposes, whether that's urban greening or cycling and walking infrastructure. Okay, so just briefly also just want to touch on the fact of why it's so important now. So the Department for Transport and TfL supported boroughs with a series of relatively cheap and quick streetscape changes as emergency measures, really to provide people with an alternative, because there was such a reduction on capacity on public transport as a result of COVID-19 social distancing. So we really didn't want to see a massive car boom, because we knew that was bad for our health in terms of air pollution, but also mass congestion on our roads. We needed to give people an alternative for those short journeys. That's all the more important in Haringey, where 2/3 of residents who work travel by public transport. Is actually the third highest rate in the UK. And also we have relatively low car ownership rate levels in the country. So we really needed to be giving people an alternative if they were worried about, travelling on overly congested public transport. And this is a chart just showing that while we saw some really good improvements in terms of not having quite so much traffic on our street during lockdown, we are now back to 2019 levels. Okay, so in terms of what does emergency transport measures, what have they looked like in Haringey? So this is missing a few bits, but the areas in green are areas that have been funded in TfL by TfL and Department for Transport in Haringey. So this green line here is CS2, so it's a cycle route, CS1, across the east of our borough, and we are seeing some improvements to that cycle lane. There were also some pavement improvements in Haringey that were funded, and also some school streets. But as a group, what we're saying Haringey really needs to see, if we're going to provide people with an alternative to public transport, is these kind of orange V's are, we'd like to see a protected cycle lane along the Piccadilly line route. We'd like to see a protected cycle lane across where the Victoria line runs. We'd also like to see cheap, low traffic neighbourhoods in Haringey, particularly in areas which are more socially deprived and see poor air quality. And we'd also like to see school streets rolled out at speed across the borough. And just finally, in terms of overarching reflections, this is a global movement. I think most urban areas in the world at the moment are considering how we can redesign our urban space, and this is our opportunity to create a new vision for Haringey. There is a walking cycling plan. I'm sure Matt will talk to this, but there's a walking cycling plan going to Cabinet in Haringey on the 13th of October, and we're really encouraging residents to write to their councillors to show support for the walking cycling plan, but also to make sure it's funded and there's actually change and infrastructure put in place. This is a really good opportunity to learn from our neighbours. So we have lots of neighbours surrounding boroughs around us really moving forward with this agenda, and we should be speaking to them and learning from it. It's a big cross-cutting issue, so this isn't just about walking and cycling, it's about cleaner air, it's about fairer streets, it's about how we move, how we interact in our communities, and we should kind of position it as such. And also just some points on funding, that we are seeing a lot of regeneration in Haringey, and we should be linking our changes to street space to that. And I probably run horrifically over time, so I'll stop. But yeah, that's it from me. I guess just the last thing is I really appreciate the method that's been used today, and I think if we are going to redesign Haringey streets, it's about bringing people together and saying, what is their vision, how can we reduce this traffic, but also how can we make walking and cycling more attractive. And I completely understand that not everybody can walk and cycle, but the idea is we enable those who can walk and cycle to do so, to make space for those who can't on public transport, and also to make sure that those who are really reliant on cars aren't stuck in traffic jams because everybody's trying to drive. Anyway, that's it.